The blood on Naomi Fletcher's hands wasn't hers, but the terror pumping through her veins belonged to her alone. As she stumbled through the darkness toward the barn, where she'd hidden her stolen horse 3 hours earlier. She'd been the fourth wife of Solomon Crane for 18 months, trapped in a compound outside Dalhart, Texas, where the scorching summer of 1878 had baked the earth until it cracked like her spirit. Tonight, she'd finally found her courage when Solomon had beaten his second wife unconscious for burning supper, and Naomi knew with absolute certainty that she would die in that house if she didn't run. The blood came from Sarah, the second wife, whose split lip Naomi had tried to clean before slipping out while Solomon drank himself into his usual stupor. She was 22 years old and had been promised to Solomon by her desperate father when she was barely 21, sold like cattle to settle a debt she hadn't known existed until the wedding day. The barn door creaked as she pushed it open, and her heart hammered so violently she thought it might break through her ribs. The mare she'd chosen was a quiet one, a dappled gray that Solomon rarely rode, and she prayed he wouldn't notice its absence until she was miles away. Her hands shook as she led the horse out into the moonless night, every shadow a potential threat, every sound a pursuing footstep. She wore the plainest dress she owned, dark blue calico that wouldn't show dirt, and she'd tied her long auburn hair back with a strip of cloth torn from her pillow. In her pockets, she carried exactly $12 she'd stolen from Solomon's desk drawer over the past 3 months, 1 coin at a time, and a small knife she'd taken from the kitchen. The compound sat 10 miles outside Dalhart proper, isolated enough that Solomon's twisted interpretation of Scripture could flourish without interference. The other families nearby knew about the arrangement but said nothing, either because they feared Solomon's wrath or because they believed a man's household was his own business. Naomi had learned quickly that screaming brought no help, only more punishment, so she'd stopped screaming and started planning. She rode hard for the first hour, letting the mare find her own pace in the darkness, trusting the animal's instincts more than her own limited knowledge of the terrain. When the first hint of dawn began to purple the eastern sky, panic seized her. Solomon would be awake soon, and when he discovered her gone, he would come after her with a fury that would make his usual violence seem gentle. He told her once what happened to wives who tried to leave, describing in detail how he dragged the last one back by her hair and locked her in the root cellar for a week with no food. Dalhart emerged from the dawn haze like a mirage, its handful of wooden buildings clustered along the railroad tracks that had brought civilization to this remote corner of the Texas Panhandle just a few years earlier. Naomi's whole body ached from the unfamiliar exertion of riding, her thighs screaming in protest, but she pushed the mare forward. She needed to find help, needed to disappear before Solomon discovered her absence. The town was barely stirring when she arrived, just a few early risers beginning their daily routines. She tied the mare behind the general store, her hands still trembling, and tried to think through the fog of exhaustion and terror. She couldn't stay here. Dalhart was too close, too obvious. Solomon would check here first. She needed someone who could help her get farther away, someone who knew the country and wouldn't ask too many questions. That's when she saw him, a tall cowboy leading his horse toward the livery stable at the far end of the street. Something about the capable way he moved, the quiet confidence in his stride, made her follow him before she could think better of it. She caught up to him just as he was about to enter the stable, and the words tumbled out in a desperate rush. "Please, I need help. I need to disappear." He turned to look at her, and she found herself staring into the most striking gray eyes she'd ever seen. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with sun-weathered skin and dark brown hair that needed cutting, wearing worn denims and a dusty shirt that spoke of long days on the trail. His face was angular and honest, and when his gaze swept over her, taking in her disheveled appearance and the barely controlled panic in her expression, something shifted in those gray eyes. "Who's after you?" His voice was low and calm, the kind of voice that made you believe things might actually be all right. "My husband. I ran. I can't go back. Please, I'll do anything. I just need to get far away from here." The words came out broken and breathless, and she hated how weak she sounded, but desperation had stripped away any pretense of pride. He studied her for a long moment, and she watched his jaw tighten as he seemed to piece together the story from what he could see, the fear in her face, the way she kept glancing over her shoulder, the desperation that clung to her like a second skin. "My name's James Thorne. I've got a camp about 15 miles northwest, up in the canyon country. It's hidden, hard to find if you don't know where you're looking. You can come there, rest up, and we'll figure out where to send you next." Relief flooded through her so intensely that her knees nearly buckled. "Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm Naomi." "We need to move now," James said, his tone shifting to something more urgent. "If he's the kind of man I think he is, he'll be coming soon. You ride hard." "I just rode 10 miles in the dark," she said, finding a spark of steel beneath the fear. "I can ride." Something that might have been respect flickered across his face. "Good. Follow me and stay close. We're going to take the back trails, avoid the main roads. With luck, he won't be able to track us through the rocky country." They left Dalhart within minutes, James setting a pace that was quick but sustainable. He led her through terrain she'd never seen before, winding between jutting rocks and through stands of scrub cedar, always moving northwest, away from Solomon's compound. The sun climbed higher, turning the August day brutally hot, but James seemed to know where every precious water source lay hidden. They stopped once to water the horses at a thin stream that trickled between red rocks, and Naomi splashed the cool water on her face, trying to wash away the lingering sense of Solomon's presence. "How long were you there?" James asked quietly, refilling his canteen. 18 months. He has 4 wives, had 4 wives. The correction felt strange on her tongue, as if she couldn't quite believe she'd really escaped. James's expression darkened. "That's not legal. Not in Texas, not anywhere in the States. Solomon doesn't care much about laws. He's got his own interpretation of everything, and enough guns and mean-spirited sons from his first wife to enforce it. The law in Dalhart won't touch him. Half of them are afraid of him, and the other half think a man's entitled to run his household however he sees fit." "The law might not touch him," James said, his voice hardening, "but that doesn't make it right. You did good running. Takes more courage than most people have." His words settled something inside her, a small piece of validation that she hadn't realized she needed so desperately. They rode on, and as the day wore into afternoon, the landscape became increasingly rugged. James led her into a canyon system that cut through the high plains like ancient scars, walls of red and orange stone rising on either side, providing shade and concealment. The temperature dropped slightly as they descended deeper into the canyons, and Naomi felt some of the tension begin to ease from her shoulders. James's camp was tucked into a hidden alcove where the canyon wall curved back on itself, creating a natural shelter invisible from the main trail. A small spring bubbled up from between the rocks, forming a pool before trickling away into the sand. It was perfect, isolated and protected, the kind of place you could disappear into and never be found. "I work for the T-Bar Ranch," James explained as he unsaddled his horse. "I'm supposed to be checking the North Ranges for strays. which means I've got legitimate reason to be out here for another week or two. No one will come looking for me, and no one knows about this place except me." Naomi slid from her own saddle, her legs nearly giving out when her feet hit the ground. Every muscle screamed in protest, and she had to grip the stirrup to stay upright. James was beside her in an instant, his hand steady on her elbow. "Easy now. You've been riding hard on no sleep and probably no food. When's the last time you ate?" She had to think about it. "Yesterday morning, I think. Maybe longer. I don't remember." He guided her to a flat rock near the spring and made her sit, then rummaged through his saddlebags and produced jerky and hardtack. It wasn't much, but Naomi ate like she was starving, which she realized she was. The food helped clear her head, and the water from the spring tasted like heaven after the long, dusty ride. "Thank you," she said again, meaning it with every fiber of her being. "You didn't have to help me. Most people wouldn't have." James settled onto a rock across from her, his gray eyes serious. "My mother was in a bad situation once before my father found her. He helped her get away, gave her a chance at her real life. She told me once that there's no greater evil than standing by when someone needs help. I guess that stuck with me. Your father sounds like a good man. He was. Died 5 years back, thrown from a horse. But yeah, he was one of the best." There was old grief in James's voice, but also pride. And Naomi found herself wanting to know more about this cowboy who'd helped her without hesitation. As the afternoon faded into evening, James built a small fire, keeping it low and smokeless, and produced coffee and beans from his supplies. The simple meal tasted better than anything Naomi remembered eating at Solomon's table, where every bite had been flavored with fear and tension. Here in this hidden canyon with a stranger who'd shown her more kindness in a few hours than Solomon had in 18 months, she felt something she'd almost forgotten existed: hope. "Where will you go?" James asked as they sat by the fire, the darkness settling around them like a protective blanket. "After you leave here, I mean. You got family somewhere?" Naomi shook her head. "My father's the one who sold me to Solomon. My mother died when I was 16. I've got an aunt in St. Louis, but I haven't seen her in years, and I don't know if she'd take me in. I've been thinking maybe I could get work in a city somewhere, someplace big enough that Solomon couldn't find me. Denver, maybe, or San Francisco. Those are good choices. Far enough away that he'd have trouble tracking you, big enough that you could disappear into the crowd." James poked at the fire with a stick, his expression thoughtful. "I could take you to the railroad at Dodge City. It's about 120 miles northeast, maybe 4 or 5 days of steady riding. From there, you could catch a train west or north, wherever you want to go." The generosity of the offer stunned her. "You do that? Take a week out of your life for a stranger?" "You're not really a stranger anymore," James said, and when he looked at her across the firelight, something warm and indefinable passed between them. "Besides, I told my boss I'd be out for 2 weeks. Might as well make it count for something worthwhile." That night, Naomi slept on James's bedroll while he took the saddle blanket, insisting she needed the rest more than he did. She tried to argue, but exhaustion won out, and she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep for the first time in months. When she woke in the gray dawn, James was already up, making coffee and checking the horses. The normalcy of the scene, the simple domesticity of it, made her chest ache with longing for a life she'd never really had. They spent that day resting in the camp, letting the horses recover from the hard ride and giving Naomi time to regain her strength. James proved to be easy company, quiet but not withdrawn, with a dry sense of humor that emerged in unexpected moments. He told her about his work on the T-Bar Ranch, about the vast herds of cattle they ran across the northern Texas plains, about the hard but honest life of a cowboy. In turn, Naomi found herself talking about her life before Solomon, about the small farm where she'd grown up, about her dreams of becoming a teacher before her father's debts had crushed that possibility. "You could still do that," James said. "Be a teacher, I mean. Once you get somewhere safe, you could find a school that needs help." "I only finished 8th grade," Naomi said, but even as she spoke, she felt that old dream stirring back to life. "I don't know if that's enough. It's more than most folks have out here, and you're smart, I can tell. You planned your escape, you made it happen. That takes intelligence and courage. Any school would be lucky to have you." His faith in her was strange and wonderful, all the more precious because it came without any expectation of return. Solomon had told her constantly that she was stupid, worthless, good for nothing but cooking and bearing children. Hearing James speak of her with respect, as if she were a person of value and capability, began to repair something inside her that had been badly broken. On the second day, James rode out early to scout the surrounding area, making sure Solomon and his sons hadn't picked up their trail. He returned at midday with the news that he'd seen no sign of pursuit, and that the trails leading away from Dalhart showed traffic heading east and south, but nothing pointing northwest into the canyons. "He's probably searching along the rail line," James said, "figuring you'd try to hop a train. That's where most runaways go, and he doesn't strike me as the type to think outside the obvious." "He's mean, but he's not clever," Naomi agreed. "He rules through fear and strength, not through intelligence. His first wife's sons are the same way, all brawn and violence and no real thought." "Good. That works in our favor. We'll stay here one more day, then start moving toward Dodge City. We'll take our time, stay off the main trails, and keep a sharp eye out. By the time we get there, enough time will have passed that even if he's still looking, he won't be looking in the right place." That afternoon, Naomi helped James mend a tear in his saddlebag, and he taught her how to properly clean and care for a saddle. The work was simple and companionable, and Naomi realized with a start that she was happy. Actually, genuinely happy, for the first time in longer than she could remember. The realization was so powerful it brought tears to her eyes, and when James noticed and asked if she was all right, she could only nod, unable to explain the complex mixture of grief and relief and joy that was overwhelming her. That evening, as they sat by the fire again, James told her about his dreams of saving enough money to buy his own small spread, maybe up in Montana where the grass grew tall and the winters were fierce but beautiful. "I've been working toward it for 5 years now," he said. "Got about half of what I need saved up. Another 5 years, maybe, and I'll have enough to make it happen." "That sounds wonderful," Naomi said, and she meant it. She could picture him there on his own land living the life he'd chosen. "I hope you get it. What about you?" James asked. "If you could have anything, any kind of life, what would it be?" The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked her that before. She thought about it, staring into the flames, and slowly the answer took shape. "I think I'd want a small house somewhere safe, with a garden and maybe some chickens. I'd want to teach, help children learn to read and write and think for themselves. And I'd want—" She hesitated, then pushed forward. "I'd want someone who actually cared about me, not someone who saw me as property. Someone kind, someone I could trust." When she looked up, James was watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You deserve all of that," he said quietly. "Every bit of it." The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither of them was quite ready to name. Then James cleared his throat and stood, breaking the spell. "I'll check on the horses," he said, and walked away into the darkness. Naomi sat by the fire, her heart racing, wondering what had just happened and what it might mean. They left the canyon camp the next morning, striking out northeast toward Dodge City. James set a moderate pace, keeping to the rough country where their trail would be harder to follow. They rode through lands where pronghorn antelope bounded across the plains and hawks wheeled overhead in the endless blue sky. At night, they camped under the stars, and James taught Naomi the constellations his father had taught him, pointing out the Big Dipper and Cassiopeia and Orion's belt. As the days passed, Naomi found herself watching James more than she should, noticing the capable way he handled everything from setting up camp, to reading the weather, to managing the horses. He was unfailingly kind to her, but also treated her as an equal, asking her opinion on which direction to take or where to make camp. It was so different from Solomon's domineering control that it felt like living in a different world entirely. On the fourth day out from the canyon, they encountered another traveler, a grizzled prospector leading a tired mule. James was instantly alert, his hand dropping casually to the gun at his hip, but the old man proved harmless, just lonely for conversation. He shared news from Dodge City, where he'd been 3 weeks earlier, and told them the cattle season was winding down, but the town was still lively with cowboys and railroad workers. After the prospector moved on, James relaxed slightly. "We're getting close now. Maybe one more day of riding." "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine," Naomi said, and realized it was true. The constant riding had toughened her, and the fear that had gripped her so tightly when she fled Solomon's compound had eased into something more manageable. She was still cautious, still looking over her shoulder, but the panic had subsided. "Actually, I'm better than fine. I feel strong." James's smile was warm and genuine. "You look strong. When I first saw you in Dalhart, you looked like you might break apart at any moment. Now you look like you could take on the world." "I'm not sure about the world," Naomi said, "but maybe I could take on a new life." "I know you can," James said, and the certainty in his voice made her believe it too. That night, they camped beside a creek that ran clear and cold despite the August heat. After supper, James pulled out a harmonica from his saddlebag and played, filling the evening air with simple, sweet melodies that made Naomi's heart ache. When he finished, she applauded, and he ducked his head with a shy smile she found utterly charming. "My father taught me," he said a man should have some music in his life even if he's not much good at it." "You're very good at it," Naomi said. "It's beautiful." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the creek and the night sounds of the prairie. Then James spoke, his voice hesitant. "Naomi, I've been thinking about what happens after Dodge City." Her heart jumped into her throat. "What about it?" "Well, you said you didn't really know where you wanted to go, that you were just thinking Denver or San Francisco. And that's fine, those are good places. But I was wondering." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "What if you didn't go anywhere right away? What if you stayed around here, found work in Dodge City or one of the other towns nearby?" "Why would I do that?" Naomi asked, though her heart was pounding and she thought she might know the answer. James turned to look at her directly, his gray eyes serious and vulnerable in the firelight. "Because I don't want you to go. I know that's selfish, and I know you need to be free to make your own choices, but these past few days with you have been the best days I've had in years. I like talking to you. I like being near you. And I think maybe you might like being near me too." Naomi's breath caught. Everything in her wanted to say yes, to throw caution to the wind and grab onto this unexpected chance at happiness. But fear held her back, fear that had been beaten into her over 18 long months. "James, I'm still married. In the eyes of the law, I'm still Solomon's wife." "The law also says a man can't have 4 wives," James pointed out gently. "Which means that marriage isn't legal in the first place. You could petition for an annulment, or just wait long enough and claim desertion. Either way, you'd be free eventually. And what if he finds me? What if he comes after me and hurts you? James's jaw tightened. Let him try. I'm not afraid of bullies, Naomi, and I think you're worth standing up for. The tears came then, hot and fast, all the pent-up emotion of the past few days spilling over. James moved closer and pulled her into his arms, holding her while she cried, his hands gentle and steady on her back. When the storm passed, Naomi pulled back just enough to look up at him, and what she saw in his face made her heart soar. I like being near you too, she whispered. I'm terrified, but I like it. Then stay, James said. Stay and we'll figure it out together. I'll help you find work, help you find a place to live. And when enough time has passed, when you feel ready, maybe we could see what this could be between us. Naomi kissed him then, leaning up to press her lips to his, and he responded with a tenderness that made her want to cry all over again. It was nothing like the rough, demanding kisses Solomon had forced on her. This was gentle and questioning and full of promise, and when they finally pulled apart, Naomi was smiling through her tears. I'll stay, she said. I'll stay and we'll figure it out. They arrived in Dodge City late the next afternoon, the bustling railroad town, a stark contrast to the quiet prairies they'd crossed. The streets were crowded with cowboys and railroad workers, freight wagons and cattle pens, saloons and hotels and shops all jumbled together in organized chaos. James led them to a respectable boarding house on a side street, away from the worst of the noise and roughness. The landlady was a stern-faced woman named Mrs. Patterson who ran a tight establishment, but had kind eyes. When James explained that Naomi needed a room and was looking for work, Mrs. Patterson looked Naomi up and down with a critical eye. Can you cook and clean? Yes, madam, Naomi said. I've been doing both for years. Can you handle difficult people without losing your temper? I've had considerable practice with that too, Naomi said, allowing a touch of dry humor into her voice. Mrs. Patterson's stern expression cracked into something resembling a smile. I've got a room available, and I could use help around here. The pay isn't much, but it includes room and board, and I don't tolerate any nonsense from the other boarders. You'd be safe here. Relief flooded through Naomi. That sounds perfect, thank you, as Mrs. Patterson showed Naomi to her room, a small but clean space on the second floor. James waited downstairs. When Naomi came back down, she found him pacing in the parlor, his hat in his hands. I need to get back to the ranch, he said, regret heavy in his voice. I'm already pushing the limits of how long I can be gone, but I'll be back in 2 weeks after I've reported in and collected my pay. Will you wait for me? I'll wait, Naomi promised. And James, thank you for everything, for saving me. He shook his head. You saved yourself, Naomi. You were the one who ran, who had the courage to escape. I just helped you along the way. He kissed her then, gentle and sweet, and then he was gone, riding south toward the T-Bar Ranch and leaving Naomi to begin her new life. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of work and adjustment. Mrs. Patterson proved to be a fair employer, demanding but not cruel, and Naomi threw herself into her duties with gratitude. She cooked and cleaned and learned how to manage the complex dynamics of a boarding house full of transient workers and permanent residents. The work was hard, but it was honest, and she was paid for it, which was more than she'd ever gotten from Solomon. At night, lying in her small room, Naomi thought about James and wondered if she was being foolish to trust him so completely. But every time doubt crept in, she remembered the way he'd looked at her across the campfire, the way he'd held her when she cried, the way he'd treated her like a person of value. She'd learned the hard way what cruelty looked like. She was choosing to believe she now recognized kindness when she saw it. James returned exactly 2 weeks later, riding up to the boarding house on a Sunday afternoon when Naomi had a rare few hours off. She saw him from the window and flew down the stairs, propriety forgotten, and met him on the porch. His face lit up when he saw her, and she knew her own expression must mirror his joy. "You came back," she said, even though she'd believed he would. "I said I would," James replied. "I'm a man of my word." He courted her properly over the following months, calling on her during her free hours, taking her to church socials and town dances, always treating her with respect and patience. Mrs. Patterson watched the developing romance with an approving eye and made sure to act as chaperone when needed, protecting Naomi's reputation even as she gave the couple space to get to know each other. Naomi bloomed under James's attention, discovering parts of herself that had been buried under Solomon's oppression. She was funny, she realized, with a quick wit that made James laugh. She was intelligent and curious, eager to learn about everything from cattle ranching to railroad engineering to the political situation brewing back east. James encouraged all of it, bringing her newspapers and books, discussing ideas with her as if her opinions mattered, which to him they clearly did. In October, a man came to Dodge City asking questions about a runaway wife. Naomi heard about it from one of the other boarders and felt the old fear slam back into her chest. James was at the ranch, and she was alone, and Solomon or one of his sons had finally tracked her here. But Mrs. Patterson proved to be made of sterner stuff than Naomi had imagined. When the man, one of Solomon's older sons, came to the boarding house asking questions, Mrs. Patterson told him flatly that she had no runaway wives here, only respectable working women, and if he didn't leave her property immediately she'd call the marshal. The son had blustered and threatened, but Mrs. Patterson had stood her ground and eventually he'd left. When James heard about it, he rode straight to Dodge City, fury written in every line of his body. He found Naomi in the kitchen, teaching one of the younger maids how to make proper biscuits, and the relief on his face when he saw her safe was profound. "I'm not leaving you unprotected anymore," he said. "I'm going to talk to my boss, see if I can get reassigned to work closer to Dodge City. I need to be near you, need to know you're safe." "James, you can't give up your position because of me," Naomi protested, even as her heart soared at his protectiveness. "I'm not giving it up, I'm just asking for a transfer, and if he won't give me one, I'll find other work." "Naomi, you matter more to me than any job." He took her hands, oblivious to the other women in the kitchen watching with romantic interest. "I love you. I think I've loved you since that first morning in Dalhart when you looked at me with all that fear and courage mixed together. I want to marry you as soon as you're legally free. I want to build that life we talked about, the one with the house and the garden and the future, with you." Naomi's eyes filled with tears, but these were tears of joy, so different from all the tears she'd cried in her old life. "I love you too." "Yes, I want that too. All of it." James's boss at the T-Bar Ranch proved amenable to reassigning him to a line camp closer to Dodge City, especially when James explained the situation. The rancher had no love for men who mistreated women and was happy to help protect Naomi. With James nearby, Naomi felt safer, and as the months passed with no further sign of Solomon or his family, she began to believe that she really might have escaped for good. In January of 1879, Naomi received word through a lawyer that Solomon had died, shot in a dispute over water rights with a neighboring rancher. The news should have brought relief, but instead Naomi felt a complex swirl of emotions. Gladness that he could never hurt her again, grief for the wasted years, and sadness for the other wives still trapped in that compound. She and James discussed trying to help them, but the lawyer informed them that Solomon's first wife had taken control of the household, and the other wives had chosen to stay. Some prisons, Naomi realized sadly, were as much in the mind as in physical circumstances. But Solomon's death meant Naomi was truly free now, no longer tied by even the pretense of a legal marriage. In March, on a bright spring day when the prairie was coming alive with new grass and wildflowers, Naomi and James were married in the small church in Dodge City. Mrs. Patterson stood as Naomi's witness, and several of James's fellow cowboys came to stand with him. It was a simple ceremony, nothing like the elaborate and oppressive wedding Naomi had endured with Solomon, and that simplicity made it all the more precious. They honeymooned for a week at James's line camp, the same hidden canyon where they'd first begun to know each other. Naomi wasn't afraid this time when James took her to bed, and he was patient and gentle, erasing the bad memories with new, beautiful ones. They talked long into the nights, planning their future, dreaming about the ranch in Montana they would build together. James continued working for the T-Bar Ranch, but he was saving aggressively now, putting away nearly every penny he earned toward their dream. Naomi kept working for Mrs. Patterson as well, enjoying the independence of earning her own money and the satisfaction of doing good work. They rented a small house on the edge of Dodge City, and Naomi planted the garden she dreamed of, growing vegetables and herbs and flowers that she could cut and bring inside to brighten their simple home. In the winter of 1879, Naomi discovered she was pregnant. The news terrified her at first, bringing back memories of Solomon's first wife's difficult pregnancies and his total indifference to her suffering. But James's reaction was so different, so full of joy and tenderness and determination to take care of her, that the fear gradually transformed into excitement. Their son was born in August of 1880, a healthy baby with James's gray eyes and Naomi's auburn hair. They named him Thomas, after James's father, and Naomi fell in love all over again watching James cradle his son with infinite gentleness. He was everything Solomon had not been: present, patient, devoted. He woke for the night feedings, walked the floor when Thomas cried, changed diapers without complaint. He treated fatherhood as the privilege it was, not as an entitlement. By 1882, James had saved enough money to make their dream a reality. They sold what little they had in Dodge City, said emotional goodbyes to Mrs. Patterson and the friends they'd made, and headed north to Montana Territory. The journey took weeks, but they arrived in the Gallatin Valley in late spring, when the mountains were still snow-capped but the valley floor was green and lush. They found their land near the town of Bozeman, a beautiful spread with a creek running through it and enough acreage for a small herd of cattle and plenty of horses. The house was barely more than a cabin when they arrived, but James expanded it over the following years, adding rooms as their family grew. A daughter came in 1884, born during a gentle spring rain, and they named her Catherine after Naomi's mother. Another son followed in 1886, whom they called Daniel. Naomi got her school too. The growing community around Bozeman needed teachers, and Naomi's dedication and natural gift for teaching made her invaluable. She taught in a one-room schoolhouse that James helped build, educating the children of ranchers and miners and shopkeepers, giving them the tools to make their own way in the world. She loved every minute of it, even the challenging days when the students were restless or the lessons didn't go as planned. James built his ranch into a successful operation, known throughout the valley for the quality of his horses and cattle, and for his fair dealing with everyone he met. He and Naomi became respected members of the community, the kind of people others turned to in times of trouble or celebration. They hosted gatherings at their ranch, opened their home to travelers who needed shelter, and made sure to help their neighbors whenever help was needed. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1889, James took Naomi back to the spot where they'd first camped together, that hidden canyon in the Texas Panhandle. They'd traveled there with the children, making a grand adventure of it, and while the children explored the creek with strict instructions not to wander, James and Naomi sat by the spring where he'd first offered her safety. "You remember what you told me that night?" James asked, his arm around her shoulders. "About what kind of life you wanted. A small house, a garden, teaching, and someone kind," Naomi said, leaning into his warmth. "I remember. Did I give you those things?" James asked, and there was genuine curiosity in his voice, as if after 10 years he still needed reassurance. Naomi turned to face him, taking his weathered hands in hers. "You gave me so much more than I ever dreamed possible. You gave me freedom and love and a life I'm proud of. You gave me children I adore and work that fulfills me. You gave me yourself every day, showing up and being the man I fell in love with. You saved me, James, not just from Solomon, but from the belief that I wasn't worth saving." "You were always worth saving," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "You were always worth everything." They kissed there by the spring, 10 years of love and partnership and shared dreams in that kiss, and Naomi marveled at the path her life had taken. From that desperate flight through the darkness, terrified and alone, to this moment of complete happiness and security. It had been worth every frightening step, every uncertain moment, because those steps had led her to James and to the life they'd built together. The years continued to pass in a golden stream of seasons and growth. Thomas grew into a serious young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did, learning everything James could teach him about raising cattle and horses. Catherine proved to be as passionate about teaching as her mother, often helping Naomi in the schoolhouse and declaring her intention to become a teacher herself someday. Daniel was the wild one, always exploring, always pushing boundaries, keeping his parents on their toes but filling their lives with laughter and adventure. In 1895, when Naomi was 40 and James was 43, they took a trip to St. Louis to visit Naomi's aunt, whom she'd finally contacted years earlier. The reunion was bittersweet, filled with tears and explanations and forgiveness for years lost. Naomi's aunt was elderly now, but sharp as ever, and she looked at James with approval and told Naomi she'd done well for herself. "I was so worried when I heard about your father selling you off like that," her aunt said. "I wanted to come for you, but I didn't know where Solomon's compound was, and I was afraid I'd make things worse. I prayed for you every night, praying you'd find a way out." "I did," Naomi said, glancing at James with infinite love. "I found a way, and I found him." They returned to Montana with a renewed sense of gratitude for the life they'd created. The ranch continued to prosper, and as James and Naomi aged, they began to turn more of the daily operations over to Thomas, who managed everything with the same quiet competence his father had shown. Catherine indeed became a teacher, taking over Naomi's schoolhouse when Naomi finally retired at 55. Daniel surprised everyone by becoming a writer, documenting the stories of Montana settlers and publishing them in newspapers back east. In the spring of 1910, James and Naomi celebrated their 31st wedding anniversary surrounded by their children and grandchildren. Thomas had married a rancher's daughter and given them 2 grandsons and a granddaughter. Catherine had married a fellow teacher and had twin girls. Even Daniel had settled down, marrying a suffragette from Boston and bringing her back to Montana, where she immediately began agitating for women's voting rights with Naomi's full support. That night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, James and Naomi sat on the porch of the house he'd built for her, watching the sun set over the mountains. They were both gray now, their faces lined with age and experience, their hands gnarled from years of hard work. But when James reached for Naomi's hand, the gesture was as tender as it had been 32 years earlier in that canyon. "I was thinking about that first night," James said. "When you came up to me in Dalhart, scared out of your mind, asking for help." "I thought you might turn me away," Naomi admitted. "I didn't know if I could trust you, but I was desperate enough to try." "I'm glad you tried," James said. "I'm glad you trusted me, because every good thing in my life came from that moment. You, our children, this ranch, all of it. It all started with you being brave enough to ask for help and me being smart enough to say yes." Naomi squeezed his hand, feeling the familiar calluses and the wedding ring he'd never removed in 31 years. "We built something beautiful, didn't we? We built something real," James said. "Something true, something worth having." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, the same stars James had taught Naomi to read all those years ago on the trail to Dodge City. The life they'd built spread out around them, solid and enduring, rooted in love and trust and mutual respect. Naomi thought about the terrified young woman she'd been, fleeing through the darkness on a stolen horse, and she wished she could go back and tell that woman that everything would be all right. That the cowboy she was about to meet would change her life in the most beautiful ways imaginable. But then again, maybe that terrified young woman had known somehow. Maybe that's why she'd found the courage to approach James in the first place, some instinct telling her that this man could be trusted, that this was the beginning of something extraordinary. As they grew older still, James and Naomi remained inseparable, two people who'd chosen each other and continued choosing each other every single day. They were in their 70s when James finally admitted he was ready to fully retire, to hand the ranch over to Thomas completely, and just enjoy their remaining years together. They traveled a little, visiting the children and grandchildren, taking a trip to San Francisco that Naomi had always wanted to make, even visiting the site of Solomon's old compound, which had been abandoned and was slowly being reclaimed by the Texas prairie. Standing in the ruins of that place that had caused her so much pain, Naomi felt only pity for the people who'd lived there, trapped by ideology and fear. She felt grateful beyond measure that she'd found the strength to run, and grateful for the man standing beside her, who'd helped her disappear for good into a life of freedom and love. James passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1924, at the age of 72, with Naomi holding his hand. It was the only time in their 52 years together that he'd left her behind, and the grief was profound. But even in her sorrow, Naomi was grateful. Grateful for every year, every day, every moment they'd shared. Grateful that she'd known what real love looked like, how it should feel, how it should sustain and lift and transform. She lived another 6 years without him, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, continuing to teach occasionally, continuing to tell the story of how she'd escaped in the night, and how a cowboy had helped her disappear into a new and beautiful life. She wanted the younger generations to understand that courage could change everything. That one decision, one desperate act of bravery, could open the door to possibilities beyond imagining. When Naomi died in 1930 at the age of 73, she was buried beside James on a hillside overlooking the ranch they'd built together. The marker reads simply, "Naomi Fletcher Thorne, beloved wife, mother, teacher, and friend." But those who knew her story understood that she'd been so much more than that. She'd been a survivor who became a thriver, a frightened young woman who'd transformed into a pillar of strength, someone who'd taken the worst life had offered and turned it into something beautiful and enduring. The ranch continued for generations after them, run by their descendants who carried forward the values James and Naomi had instilled: integrity, kindness, courage, and the unwavering belief that every person deserved dignity and freedom. The schoolhouse Catherine had run eventually became part of a larger school system, but a plaque commemorated Naomi's years of service there, ensuring that her dedication to education would be remembered. The story of Naomi's escape and the cowboy who'd helped her became part of local legend, told and retold around dinner tables and campfires. It became a story about courage and kindness, about the transformative power of love, about how one moment of bravery and one act of compassion could ripple forward through time, creating waves of goodness that touched countless lives. And somewhere in the vast Montana sky, if such things were possible, two souls walked together through eternal prairies, hand in hand, continuing the conversation they'd started by a fire in a hidden Texas canyon so many years before. A conversation about dreams and possibilities, about building something real and true, about loving and being loved in return. A conversation that had no end, because real love never truly dies. It just transforms, taking new shapes, living on in the hearts and lives of those who come after. Proof that even in the darkest nights, help can arrive in unexpected forms, and that disappearing into a new life sometimes means finding yourself for the very first time.